Hello, good morning, guys. Welcome to yet another episode of Math Chats. Today we have Peter Williams with us. Peter has spent over 30 years in the variety of both executive and non-executive positions in consumer-facing business, spanning retails, leisure, media, and consumer products. Peter, would you want to say a little bit about yourself?
Well, I know what there really is to say. I mean, I'm very pleased to be here to do this sort of thing. It's always fascinating to meet people of your generation that are doing new stuff and learning new stuff, because that's from where all the ideas come from. So just as much as you're going to quiz me, I'm intrigued to learn a bit about what's going on here too.
Right. We're very interested about your background. So you have worked in ASOS and Selfridges and Boohoo. So if you could just say a little bit about the places.
Sure. Well, I suppose it's fair to say I kind of fell into the sort of fashion world a little bit by accident, really, because I'm actually a boring accountant, really, by training, if you like. So after I graduated, I worked for one of the large accounting firms, and then I worked for a consultancy business. And my first sort of step in retail was actually with Freeman's, which is not a name you necessarily recognize today. Freeman's was a very traditional, old-fashioned mail order business. And Freeman's was then acquired by the group who at the time owned Selfridges, and that's how I came to be at Selfridges. So I've just sort of really gone on from there to a whole variety of retail roles.
Right. So I'll get on with the questions. The first question I would like to ask you: you have worked in such incredible companies. Can you tell us a bit about your journey and your career, except for working in fashion industry?
Okay. Sorry, did you say within the internet business or just generally?
Generally, yes.
So generally. So as I said, I'm not really a fashion person by training at all. I've always had an interest in it, but I didn't sort of start out there. And what happened really was, while I was at Selfridges, I was the finance director. And I worked with a very interesting guy called Vittorio Radici, who really led a lot of the changes that happened at Selfridges in the 1990s. And when Vittorio decided he wanted to go and work elsewhere, he left the company. I was moved into his position as CEO. So, no hardship. I then was entitled to go and see the fashion shows in Milan and Paris, et cetera, et cetera. So really a dream job.
Definitely a dream job. So I wanted to ask you, what do you think has been the diversity in your work, and what has been the barrier in working in different sectors?
So can you elaborate that a bit more? How do you mean exactly?
So you have worked, your roles were very diversified. You worked as non-executive, executive.
Okay. So my, the path I've sort of trodden is very much, my early first part of my career, it's very much executive roles. So initially in finance, then the chief exec role at Selfridges, and then actually after Selfridges, I ran another business that was in tax and duty-free retailing. So that was where my executive life finished. And then when I left the company Alpha that was doing tax and duty-free retailing, I was in my mid-50s, and I quite enjoy work. I want to carry on as long as I can. And people, once they get to that sort of age, typically are doing non-executive roles rather than executive roles. So I decided to make the switch, and that's how I came to get involved at ASOS and at Boohoo as a non-executive.
Right. So I would ask you that what do you think about modern day slavery in fashion industry with the brands you've worked with? Also, how do you think brands like Boohoo, ASOS and Selfridges deal with it?
Well, I mean, for Selfridges, it's slightly different because Selfridges is selling other people's brands, if you like. So whilst they'll want to make sure everything is done properly, they're not directly in control of what's going on. In ASOS and Boohoo, it's slightly different. ASOS, as you may know, is sort of 2/3 other people's brands, so the same point applies, but a third of it is their private label, and Boohoo is an entirely private label business. So I think the starting point to say about all of this is nobody ever intends to either break the rules or break the law or ride roughshod over people at all, because to do that in the consumer space with a consumer brand is absolutely stupid, because you will kill the brand. If something happens or somebody discovers something's not right, it's terrible terrible publicity for the business, and it's unacceptable, and everybody knows that. The problem comes, I think, that in particularly in the in the sector that Boohoo is in, if you like, with lower price product, that actually you don't necessarily have ultimate visibility over who is actually making the product. Yes, you contract with, a particular supplier that you know, but it's quite possible that that supplier is then contracting some of the manufacture to somebody else. And certainly what happened at Boohoo, and we had a couple of instances of this when I was there, and there have been some more instances since, was that, we contracted with a company. We knew them, we were happy for them to make the goods, but unbeknownst to us, they subcontracted the work to another factory, and we were not happy with that particular factory. So there is, I think, still a lot more work that needs to be done on all of this. And I think, ASOS have probably led the way in being much more open about this. Boohoo are starting to do similar things where they're much more transparent about who is making the product and where it's being made.
Yes, definitely. Thank you so much. I think I always wanted to know about this because the brand, these are very big brands, and yes. I always wanted to know what the visibility of these brands stands, because that leads our way to the fashion designing. And
yeah, I mean, as I said, nobody would intentionally,
yes.
Employ somebody below the minimum wage or do something that was illegal or all the rest of it. Nobody I've come across in the fashion industry deliberately sets out to do that. The problem comes that you don't always have complete visibility of the final manufacturer, and then if that's found wanting, then you have to correct it.
Right. Thank you. I wanted to ask, how are you integrating sustainability? Do you think these brands they have like sustainability standards, or they are incorporating it in their?
I think this kind of depends on who you are. I mean, some fashion brands, Patagonia would be a good example, have had sort of the whole issue about sustainability in their sort of DNA since they were created, really. And I think that is fantastic. And in the case of Patagonia, I think in particular, it sets them apart from everybody else. I think you've then got a group of people who are, starting out. Like there's I don't know if you've come across a brand in the States called Everlane. They have a store in Soho in New York, and they're a good example. It was a new business. They started on the sustainability sort of tack, if you like, when they were created. So again, a bit like Patagonia, that's really good. The businesses for whom it's much more difficult are the businesses that have been going for many, many years and are now trying to, if you like, catch up. And it's not necessarily in their DNA, and it's not where they started out.
Right. Do you feel that it's important for a new fashion designer or fashion brand to start adopting sustainability measures in their brand?
Yes, I think it is, because I think that that's quite rightly the way the world is moving, and whilst I think there is a certain argument, and I'm not saying I support this, that dare I say it, we saw this a bit at Boohoo, that young girls can be a bit kind of schizophrenic about it, if you like. One minute they're sort of all for sustainability, and then that night they're on the site looking at something, and actually all that sort of stuff seems to go out the window, or they forget it, or whatever. But I think fundamentally people are all brands will want to do the right thing. They'll want to be consistent with what is the right thing to do amongst their peer group, and that's why it's a good thing that all these changes are happening.
Right. So my next question would be, are these brands, do you think, are prototyping digitally, like adapting with virtual reality or augmented reality, like having these kind of like next generation technologies in their brands?
I think that will come, but I think some of these things, you have to be careful, don't end up just being gimmicks. I mean, from my own perspective, and I don't know whether this is right or wrong, but I could foresee what would be great is that you can take a picture of yourself, load it up onto the system, create an avatar, if you like, of you with 2 dimensions, probably your height and your weight for the sake of argument, and then clothe it, and then have the avatar move and turn around through 360 degrees and all of this sort of stuff. I mean, I think that has, as an example, has a real traction, if you like, because the consumer sees a real benefit in it. And it's also something that you can kind of see that technology can get there, even with, what's going on currently.
Wow, that's really inspiring, because I'm doing a project in virtual reality in fashion. That's my master's project. And I'm trying to incorporate these kind of ideas in my project. So it's really refreshing that you think this.
Yeah. I mean, I think that, it has to be done in such a way where it's not sort of seen as being very clunky. I mean, I remember when I was at ASOS, and this was a simple thing, they were the first people to show a little sort of catwalk 5-second interlude or whatever of a model, walking up and down wearing the dress and all the rest of it. And I know that, that's really important when, as it is for a man when he's buying a suit. So for a woman, if she's buying a dress, she wants to see how it moves and all that sort of thing.
Yeah. I think that really helps me a lot when I'm buying off from ASOS, because I see the fall, I see the fabric.
Yes.
And it's really important for me to know how the dress looks.
That's why I think, it would be a fantastic step if you can actually have you being dressed by it, if you like, without you having to go all the way to a changing room and get changed and all that sort of stuff.
Do you think that somewhere substitutes the consumer experience when they don't go to the store, or?
Well, I think this is an interesting question. I mean, I grew up using stores, and Selfridges, if you like, is the epitome of a physical space. I mean, if the lights ever get turned out on Oxford Street, that will be the last place where they get turned out, because Selfridges doesn't, everything it sells is somebody else's product. So why'd you go there? Well, you go there because the architecture is fantastic. There's a buzz in the place. There's hordes of people there. You're just as much going there to watch what everybody else is up to and what they're wearing as you are buying for yourself, perhaps. So I think that, that still has there's still a relevance to that experience, and there still is a relevance to people wanting to go shopping with their girlfriends or with their wives or husbands or partners or whatever. And that can be that is, not for everybody, but that is a good experience. I think the online thing, what online has done is kind of smash through that and sort of said, well, you don't have to go if you don't really want to. And as for certain products, and I've done it myself, I buy a pair of Boss chinos in a certain color, and I might have tried them on first time in the store, and that's fantastic. But then when I look for them online, there are actually 16 different colors, And and last year during lockdown, I bought 14 of them or something, just because I knew I had the fit, I knew I liked the shape of them and all the rest of it, and there was no way I was ever going to be able to either traipse around the stores and all the rest of it. So I think that people, consumers' leisure time is very precious. So wherever they see an opportunity that they can buy a commodity product in particular, or can buy things online, they're going to take it up. So in my view, all fashion brands need to be in both places, quite frankly. They need to have the physical stores for the kind of touchy-feely experience, but they also need to have the online trading environment.
So now I wanted to ask you, how do you see the future of retail? Like, what do you feel is the future?
Well, I mean, I think, we're in a very interesting period. Well, we have been in a very interesting period for quite a while. And if you take the UK, over the last sort of, before COVID, in the previous 15 years or so, the amount of retail space in the UK had increased by more than the kind of gross available spend, if you like. And in the middle of that, the internet came along and removed a whole chunk of spend that used to go on in physical stores and put it on the internet. And I think that in a way, physical retail in general was in trouble before COVID. Now it's much worse, because as you will see just when you walk around any major shopping centre or major high street, there are quite a number of stores that are closed, and they're either not reopening or they don't look as though they're going to reopen. And you've read about Debenhams closing and Topshop and all this sort of thing. I mean, names that 10 years ago you would have said are the absolutely fundamental part of any high street. So I think that there's got to be an adjustment, and there is an adjustment going on in terms of the amount of retail space. I also think it's difficult sorry, and that has to happen because of transfer basically to the internet and what's going on there. But I think that the really tricky bit is that if you get in a shopping mall, if one or two units close, then they put a huge picture of a good-looking boy and girl on the front of it, and actually you walk past it and you don't really realize necessarily there should be a shop there. On the high street, because you've got lots of individual buildings with different architectures and all the rest of it, you notice it immediately. So what is happening is some high streets are getting quite fragmented with shops being closed intermittently up and down the high street. And what you really want is for all the shops, as it were, to shuffle up to one end,
right,
so that then releases a big space to be redeveloped and recreated as something else. And it's probably leisure, or it might be residential, or it might be a public art space or whatever. Those spaces, those environments need to change, because otherwise you're going to get this sort of fragmented and broken up sort of high street, which isn't going to be very attractive.
Yes. So now I would like to ask, what do you think are the next fashion platforms emerging, such as Depop? So it has changed the entire fashion industry, because secondhand fashion.
Yeah, I think this is really interesting, and I think we're still at the early stages, and it will be interesting to see how the consumer reacts to this and how they behave towards it. I think it will definitely appeal to quite a number of people. I mean, it's always been the case that whether it's through charity shops or secondhand shops or whatever, people have bought secondhand clothes. This is not a new idea in that respect. What Depop is managing to do is make it a lot easier,
right,
obviously, and make it a lot more interactive. Which is great. And then the other one I think that is really interesting in the similar vein is people like Her, which is a rental model, where you may not be able to afford the Rixo dress for £300 or whatever, but you can rent it for a week, or rent it for a weekend, or rent it for a particular party, and all the rest of it. And I think that has interesting mileage. And initially, some of those things will probably be centered around the consumer. That's fine. But actually, things like the rental thing, I could see some of the brands actually engaging in that, really, because it would, if they take a positive view on it, it's a way of, getting the brand into the hands of a bunch of consumers who maybe couldn't afford to buy the Rixo dress, but may be able to buy the Rixo dress when they've graduated from university and all that sort of stuff, and they've got a job.
But do you think this is somewhere taking away if I'm buying from ASOS, I buy it on, I buy the new clothes, but if I'm buying from Depop, I would buy the secondhand Depop. So do you think people might start using the Depop as their actual platform and ASOS?
Well, I mean, I think that's inevitable. I mean, the other thing not to forget, I mean, the fashion sort of sector and the fashion industry, I mean, it's huge, and the spend is enormous.
Right.
And you're right. I wouldn't necessarily say buying on Depop is incremental sales. You're quite right. A portion, maybe a large proportion,
right,
will be sort of substitution, because then they won't go to ASOS and buy the new garment. You're right. But I mean, I think the industry just has to face up to that. What maybe I should have said this earlier. What I think is really interesting about technology is if it's good technology and it's relevant, it forces people to change the way they behave, or it encourages them to change
right,
the way they behave. And what's happening now is that the consumer's in control. If you go before the internet, the stores told you this is when we're going to be open. And by the way, I mean, when I started working in retail, no shops are open on a Sunday. And John Lewis used to shut at 1 o'clock on a Saturday. I mean, unbelievable today. And the shops were in control. They said, this is when you can shop. If you want it delivered to you, well, I'll deliver it to your home, but you've got to be in all day, wait for it, and all the rest of it. And now what's going on is that because the arrival of the internet, the consumer is controlled, because they can shop 24/7. They can say, I want it delivered to my home or my hall of residence or to my office or whatever, and the consumer's in control, and the consumers understandably love that. And it's a problem for the retailers because some of that brings extra costs, but this is just the way life develops, if you like.
Yeah. So now I would ask you, from your perspective, what do you think are the next futuristic fashion approaches for the brand you have worked for?
I think it's difficult to tell, really, because I think that the arrival of the internet was a kind of step change, a revolution, if you like, a technology revolution, if you like. And I think what we're seeing now is gradual, sort of small, incremental kind of changes. I mean, I think what is fundamental is that through the digital channel, a brand can express itself actually in much more detail than it can in a store. I mean, yes, a store is a physical experience, and that's lovely and all the rest of it. But if you want to articulate the history of the brand, if you want to show a much wider range of product, I mean, the internet is a store without walls, and it's a market without any borders. It's actually sort of almost limitless, really. So that opportunity to expound on what the brand is all about is fantastic, and the brands need to do that, because if they don't do that, the competition will, and they will miss out, because as your generation gets old, graduates, gets jobs, gets older, and all the rest of it, gets more money as they earn money and all that sort of stuff. You've grown up with this as your starting point, and the physical stores will suffer.
Right. I wanted to ask, what skills do you think young creatives need to have right now to look out for the present time of work?
Well, I mean, I don't myself come from kind of creative background, so I guess that's in a way difficult for me to answer in some respects. I think I'm sure, and this is always the case, frankly, but it must be worse now. It's getting started is the big challenge. And I appreciate, you end up probably sending a lot of emails you don't get a reply for, or you get a rejection from, and that's really tough. But don't give up on it. Okay. Don't give up on it. Keep pushing. And one of the things we actually used to do at Selfridges a lot, and I don't know if they do it today, but even if you end up through a Saturday job or through a weekend job or through a part-time job working on the sales floor, at least then you're kind of inside, what I would say is inside the tent. Right. You can see what's going on, and then you will know, when they are looking for merchandisers or creative people to work in the marketing department or whatever, then you will get to hear about these roles, and you're in pole position, because there will be somebody working alongside you and says, oh, I know this lady, she's really good, she's really keen to work for the store, she's been here for 6 months already working, weekends or whatever, why don't we give her a try, rather than somebody, nobody's ever met.
So do you think people who are working already in the place of work get more preference than people who are applying from outside?
I think I wouldn't say it's true in every case, and it may not be true in every discipline, but I think getting inside, as I describe it, always getting inside the tent helps. When you're inside the tent, you can see what's going on, and you will forge contacts with the people who are working there. You'll see the notice boards. You're just much closer to everything. When you are, on the outside, not inside the company in any shape or form, it's much more difficult. Much more difficult, because it's good news from, for a company like Selfridges, it's much easier and safer for them to hire somebody they already know to an extent, rather than cold calling, if you like, on people they don't know.
Yes, thank you. And we are going to have the last question, which is, what message do you think you have for young creatives who are aspiring to work in these big brands?
Well, as I said in answer to one of the other questions, I would say, don't give up. It is a laborious, painful process, I know, and often you get a lot of rejection, and it is mud against the wall to a degree. You don't be afraid to use your contacts. Use things like LinkedIn, because all the recruiters use that rather than, they will go through agencies, but they'll have a lot of their own people scanning what's going on LinkedIn. If you're in a relevant course, talk to the tutors, any contacts they may have, be sort of almost promiscuous, if you like, in trying to exploit any contacts you have, whether they're friends or family or your, contacts through your university or whatever. And as I said before, don't be afraid to go, go and work in Selfridges at the weekends. Just serving on the shop floor. That it's a start. It'll help.
To add on that, I wanted to ask you, do you feel that the fashion industry is a little welcoming to young creatives?
Yeah, I think it is. No, I think it is a creative place. It's very. I don't just work in the fashion industry, but I would say generally in terms of diversity of whether it's male or female or race or religious background or whatever, I would say generally retailers are good at that, actually, and they have to be good at that, because if their customers are diverse, and if they're not diverse, then they're going to block out a whole group of people. So it's in their interest to have people from all parts of the world and all attitudes and all, whatever.
Right. Thank you so much, Peter. Thank you so much for being here. We are so glad you could make it.
It's a pleasure. I enjoyed it. Thank you.